The Vikings are an illuminating tale about seafaring people who raided, pirated, traded and settled throughout some parts of Europe eventually to become movie stars of today. Vikings is the name given to people who originally came from Scandinavia. A long time ago, between the 8th and the late 11th centuries, the Vikings raided, pirated, traded and settled throughout many parts of Europe. It is commonly acknowledged that the Vikings were the first Europeans to reach North America. At the time they were, on the one hand, spreading the culture to foreign lands. On the other hand, however, they brought home slaves, concubines and foreign cultural influences. The Vikings spoke the language called Old Norse and made inscriptions in runes. The Vikings had their own laws, art and architecture. And they were not only interested in raiding foreign lands, but many of them worked as farmers, fishermen, craftsmen and traders. Popular representations of the Vikings today are rarely accurate and are usually based on cultural cliches and stereotypes. For example, there is no evidence that the Vikings wore horned helmets. It was a costume element that first appeared in the 19th century.
The place of origin of the Vikings was the present-day Denmark, Norway and Sweden. However, their impact has spread on a larger scale. They can therefore be called a kind of influencers. They occupied territories called Danelaw, which encompassed most of the present-day England. Expert sailors and navigators opened the road to the new lands with their characteristic longships, which resulted in the foundation of independent settlements in the Faroe Islands, Iceland and Greenland. The last one was named so by Eric the Red, the discoverer of the island, to encourage people to settle there as it was rather unwelcoming land. And how can you not trust the redheads? Vikings even reached North America and set up a short-lived settlement in Canada. They called this region Vinland. As it turns out, the Gauls were not the first Europeans in America. Moreover, a group of Vikings called Rus went along the Dnieper and Volga trade routes across modern Russia, Belarus and Ukraine. The Rurik dynasty took control of these territories, which resulted in the creation of Kievan Rus. A bit awkward. Oh! The local population had contact with Arabs too. Swedish emissaries also visited a beautiful city called Constantinople. Scandinavians served as mercenaries in the service of Byzantine Empire as the imperial bodyguards. They were known as Varangian Guard. During their visit to Hagia Sophia Church in Constantinople, the world has witnessed one of the first accounts of vandalism, as one of the Vikings left an inscription that can be translated to "Halfdan craves these runes, all Halfdan was here." Therefore, the next time someone catches you doing this, simply say that you are practicing history. However, what does the word Viking actually mean? One theory suggests that the word Viking came from the word Vik, meaning small bay. Another one says that the Old Norse word Viking might have originally meant a long-distance sea journey, and the word Vikingr would originally stand for its participants. So no, actually most Scandinavians were not Vikings. However, the term has become very much ingrained and all in all, let it remain so.
For most of the Viking Age, there were only three societal classes. They consisted of Thrall, Carl and Jarl. In short, Thralls were slaves, Jarls were earls, chieftains and warlords, and everyone else were Carls. However, later in the second half of the Viking Age, there was developed a new social class tier, that consisted of kings and queens. Although these classes were fairly concrete, with a clear divide throughout society, it was possible for individuals to move up and down between the defined classes.
Hey, isn't any ladies around?
I'm not going to stay home like some housewife. You think women belong in a kitchen?
Yeah!
One day, women will have equal rights.
Yeah!
Well, actually, written sources portray Viking women as independent and possessing rights. Compared to women elsewhere in the same period, Viking women definitely had more freedom. However, there were limits to this. Even if women had a relatively stronger position, they were officially still inferior to men. If the marriage did not work, then the husband and wife could divorce, which was very unusual for that time. Viking sagas involve many divorced women and widows who marry again. The Icelandic sagas describe a large number of divorce rules, which are also an evidence of advanced legal system. But what did women do? The answer is basically everything. Imagine your husband going on a journey to unexplored lands. What do? Well, you don't have much of a choice. You maintain the farm, the house, and if you happen to live in a town, you also do crafts and trade. So, a woman could become a proper entrepreneur and a priest. I mean, this was also an option. Shield maidens also defied traditional gender roles. These women were not only skilled in combat, but were also said to display exceptional bravery on the battlefield. While their exact prevalence is still a subject of historical debate, archaeological evidence and sagas suggest that women did take up arms and participated in battles and raids alongside their male counterparts. What else did women do? Well, finances. Economics was the domain of women. After all, Vikings considered mathematics to be witchcraft. So, who would be better suited to deal with calculus than women, right? Especially because magic did play an important role in the Norse world. One magic, called Seidr, was largely concerned with fate. Those who knew Seidr could both see the threats of fate and subtly manipulate them. Women who used it were typically treated with respect. This was not necessarily the case for men, however, because by choosing a traditionally feminine art form, they were viewed as unmanly and could even face persecution.
Given how commonly we're exposed to elements of Norse mythology in our pop culture, there's a good chance that you're probably familiar with a lot of names already, be it the almighty Thor, the All-Father Odin, Loki, Valhalla, Ragnarok, etc. But beyond these grand heroes and concepts, what did a typical Norse mythology tale actually read like? What did skalds sing of in mead halls? And what did the listeners actually make of it?
In Norse mythology, there is not one but 9 worlds, all based around a cosmological tree. Gods don't reside on some strange mountaintop, but rather live in one of the worlds, a heavenly Asgard. Humanity inhabits Midgard, sometimes called Middle-earth, which was created in the center of the cosmos, where Odin met a giant called Ymir. It's hard to believe the king of gods met with the giant for a cup of tea, because it didn't happen. He just simply killed him. Odin created the realm of Midgard from the parts of Ymir's body. Ew. Most modern humanity knows Norse mythology from Marvel franchise. Shame. Shame. Which results in massive misinformation. One thing actually stands correct. Loki, though is a pain, usually ends up doing good through his mischief. A good example, once he ripped all hair out of Thor's head's wife as a prank, and to avoid Thor breaking all of his bones, he instigated 2 blacksmiths to prepare gifts for gods. One of them was new hair for Thor's wife, obviously, but one of the other ones, much more useful, was an unbreakable hammer called Mjolnir. Thor loved Mjolnir so much that he was ready to give up Freya's hand in marriage just to get it back. Loki and Heimdall made a clever plan. They dressed Thor as Freya and sent him to the hijacker to have a dinner and a wedding. After the dinner, however, Thor retrieved Mjolnir and, well, he killed everybody present. Shall we have a toast to Thor's mercy? Yeah, maybe on the next wedding. One time Loki actually did something dreadful was when he begat 3 illegitimate children, each worse than the other. First was a snake, Jörmungandr, that got bigger each day. He was put in a cosmos ocean and will be there until he's able to wrap around home of Midgard. The second child was a beautiful girl. Sounds nice, huh? Well, it would be if not for the fact that she was constantly decaying on half of her body. Her name was Hel, and she became the ruler of unworthy souls. The third child was a wolf called Fenrir, that gods feared and confined. In anger, he swore he will break free and devour the sun, the moon, leaving the world in darkness. Quite optimistic, isn't it? His revenge will come together with Ragnarok, the end of the world, when the endless winter will cover all 9 worlds and everything will burn and turn into dust. Fenrir and Jörmungandr will spread death with Loki and his legions from Hel's kingdom. Odin and Thor will face them with an army of warriors descended from Valhalla for the last battle. The world will be swallowed whole by the waters of the cosmos ocean. Don't you worry, a better world will emerge out of it. The children of the gods will reign in a new land. There they will find little figures of gods from the past that will arrange into a game of chess, which, basking in the light of the new sun, young gods will play. Well, now this does sound a little bit more optimistic, doesn't it?
Though we have quite a few of such written tales about the gods, in reality, paradoxically, we know very little about the actual rituals and practices of the Old Norse believers, the so-called Old Way, which is mostly because the written records that we do have are from quite a late period, the 13th century, and were written by Christians who didn't really care about much beyond the gods. What scholars are quite confident in is that a practice central for the Vikings was called blot, and that certainly sounds very Viking, but what did it actually mean? Well, archaeologists found many lakes, like such, and groves in Scandinavia dedicated as ritual places, full of deposited riches, foods, weaponry, and like hundreds of corpses, animal and human alike. Because blots were basically sacrifices for the gods, and Vikings would make these sacrifices very often and very needlessly violent, like such. And they would usually happen before pretty much anything, before a marriage, for a new season, when disease struck, or when going raiding, so every week, basically. The truth is that we're not actually sure about most of what we assume about the Old Norse beliefs. As such, it's possible that some of these tales about the gods may not even have played the same role back in the day that we now associate them with. For example, Ragnarok may have not even existed in the minds of the contemporaries, but we have simply created it later as an apocalypse story, like in the Bible. Though even if so, even if they were completely absent from those times, I mean, hey, they still play the role today in our contemporary world by inspiring literal waves of great art.
It is worth to note at the very beginning that probably the majority of Viking warriors were not very well armed. The basic equipment of the warrior was simple clothing, like a tunic. Leather armor was not used at all. A Viking wielded an axe, which was an effective fighting tool and, most importantly, cheap to produce. The primary weapon of an infantryman was a spear, allowing them to keep their opponent at a distance. Their main protection was the round wooden shield. This was the most basic and effective equipment of the Viking. A richer warrior could afford better weaponry. This included, most importantly, the sword, which was also a status indicator. The sword could also be decorated with various ornaments. They were handed from generation to generation and could also possess names like the legendary Tyrfing or Andrzej, for example. In addition, a wealthy warrior could wear a helmet which disappointingly did not have horns. There were different kinds of helmets, from the simple ones with a nozzle to the fancier spectacle helmets. A chainmail was also an important element of protection, providing very good shielding for torso.
Well, how about the Vikings in pop culture? Well, stories about the Vikings and Norse mythology, or tales inspired by them, can easily be found in modern entertainment. From music and film to video games, each medium offers a unique experience and interpretation of the Northmen that often strays from historical accuracy in favor of legends and myths. And how about music? Nowadays, some folk artists draw inspiration from Viking culture and Norse mythology. Bands such as Vardruna or Heilung create music inspired by ancient runic texts using traditional instruments and vocal techniques of the Viking Age. In addition to that, many heavy metal bands draw inspiration from Viking mythology, history and imagery. How about the world of visual arts? Well, film and television often blend elements of history, mythology and action to create compelling stories set during the Viking Age. For instance, Robert Eggers' The Northman is a revenge film that takes place in the 10th century in Iceland. The story is based on the Norse tale of Prince Amleth, who seeks to avenge the murder of his father. Even though the film features a few magical elements in its narrative, the director aimed to create the most authentic Viking experience possible. The team behind the film, especially the set and props designers, consulted countless experts to ensure that the work was historically accurate. The movie presents the viewers with the brutal reality of the Viking Age as well as the bizarre customs and beliefs of that particular period.
Video games allow players to engage with the world of the Vikings in different ways. Viking-themed games provide a variety of experiences that range from historical accuracy to mythological fiction. For example, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is an interesting case of blending history with fiction and mythology. The game is set in the 9th century during the Viking invasion of England and features historical locations, events and figures. However, these are fictionalized for the sake of gameplay and narrative. In addition to that, mythological creatures and gods play a crucial role in the story.
Oh well, that's the end of this episode. Hopefully everyone has survived. Thank you very much for watching and see you next time!